Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the new news. My name is Paul, and I hope that everyone is doing great today. I hope that everyone's family is safe, that you're safe, that your friends are safe. And there has been a lot going on, but not necessarily a lot that can be reported. And so, while we do have a bunch of news today and a little bit of special information as well, they're just keep in mind that I know a lot of people are here for things like the offensive in Donbas and the stuff going on in MARIUPOL, as well as a lot of the international news. And something I would greatly ask of the community as you guys are joining us here is, especially for international news, we have a lot of sources for Ukraine. We're always looking for more. If you guys can, if the community could reach out to us on Discord, reach out to the staff members, and pass along any sources you might have for international news, independent sources. That would be great, because I know sometimes the stream is a little bit lacking on some information, and that would be greatly appreciated. Also, I ask that you check out the links in this description, because in the description we have fundraisers for different parts of the world. One was added today for part of the Horn of Africa, for the country of Ethiopia, as we have some news coming out today that we will get to a little bit later in the stream. But that charity alone, 99.6% of all donations go directly to their program. Most of the different donations that we have, the fundraisers, we have vetted them. Somewhere between 70 to over 90% of your donations directly go to their programs and directly help them and people in need, and don't go towards those administration's costs that pay for salaries and stuff like that. So one of the things we look for, if you have more donations, we are still looking for stuff for South Africa. We're still looking for stuff for all over the world. We know there's many humanitarian crises that haven't been covered yet here. So please let us know. Tell us what those are. Give us some links. We want to go vet those, and we want to get those added so we can continue to be that force for good. We want to be the news that gives back, not just, so we're never going to be profiting off of this. We're never going to have super chats or anything. Everything will be a fundraiser, always will be a fundraiser. And with that, we're going to dive directly into the news. And so the first thing we have is that the president of the European Council actually visited Kyiv today and met with President Zelensky regarding the ongoing war and the European cooperation that's going on there. There's also trips up to Borodyanka and Bucha. So there were some statements made on both sides, but that is what we got, and we have a video of that today.
Дякуємо за приїзд, дуже дякую Шарлі, тобі особисто твоїй команді щодо ризиків, які є в Європі, в Африці, тощо у світі через ймовірний голод. Для України гарантує безпеки, що ми дуже хочемо, щоб Європа те, що ми потребуємо, і дуже широко сподобалося.
So it's good to see that is going on. Once again, he joins a large string of other European leaders and world leaders that have come to Ukraine and to see Zelensky in person, speak to him in person. We've seen Remember, we've seen the presidents of places such as Czechia coming, Lithuania, Poland. We've seen Boris Johnson, who's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Right now, there are talks of U.S. envoys going to Ukraine as well, though that hasn't been set in stone yet. And so now that the Russian forces have withdrawn and the fighting is really focused on this eastern part of the country, while it's not entirely safe in the rest of the country, it is safe enough to have some of those diplomatic missions, and it would be very risky for Russia to conduct any kind of strikes on Kyiv with those kind of diplomatic missions going on. It's putting high-level government officials from other nations in potential harm is probably not something Russia is, or at least we would like to assume is something that they would not like to do. Moving on, we do have some reports regarding some very heavy shelling in Kharkiv. Kharkiv, since the beginning of the operation, the official start of the operation, we've seen shelling prior to the operation, but pretty much it's been sustained since the operation began. We didn't have a whole lot on it yesterday, but today we do. There was more going on today. We don't know the casualties, however, at this point, but we can see there are some extensive fires raging throughout the city. We also know that of course know that there are likely also civilian casualties. We just, once again, don't have those figures. Once we have some more updated figures on that, we will let you know. It is a very fluid situation, very dynamic and ever-changing. And so the information we're getting regarding the war right now is limited already, just because there isn't a lot. People aren't picking up their phones right away, because that's the last thing you would probably think about if you were stuck in the middle of a war zone. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get out, they're trying to flee, they're trying to put themselves in basements and bunkers and places where they can hide and get away from the shelling and be safe, not necessarily wanting to go out and film these all the time. So can't say I blame them. And so we have a video here. Let's take a look. Not a very long video, but we can tell that there is significant amounts of shelling. And once again, please bear with us regarding the news on the war thus far, as one, there's not a lot that we can report on definitively, and two, it is dynamic and ever changing, and we aren't going to be 100% accurate on all of this. So we're doing our best, but it's the best that we can do at this point. However, we do know that police did seize black market weapons in the city of Kharkiv as well. Apparently, as the Russians came through, there was large stockpiles that were being taken from Ukraine by smugglers. They found it in a warehouse inside the city. Police are currently going through that, and that will be returned to the Ukrainian armed forces. We've heard of different things such as smugglers and stuff before, mostly for trying to get able-bodied men out of Ukraine. As Zelensky at the start of the war said, all able-bodied men, I believe between the ages of 18 and 60, that are able to fight, that do not have medical conditions or have less than 3 children, are required to stay in the country. And so there has been some limited scope of people, not necessarily, there's been a very small sect of individuals that we know of that have attempted to escape or have paid for smugglers to get them across the border. Weapon smuggling and equipment smuggling, on the other hand, is a little bit different. But I'm glad that was able to be recovered and that can be used. There was some news also today regarding some more equipment. Apparently, Ukraine was able to get at least 20 more aircraft serviceable and in fighting condition today, based off of spare parts that they were able to acquire somehow. We don't know how, but we didn't see any footage or videos or anything regarding that. There weren't any solid news leads, mainstream media-wise, for us to go with it. But that is some more news that we're hearing coming out, and if we can get more confirmation, I'll be adding that here in the next couple of days at least. But even as this offensive has begun, we do know that there's more equipment coming into Ukraine. We saw yesterday more equipment leaving out of Gamel, so we know that there's more still on the way that hasn't even arrived yet. But today there is video footage of more equipment here in Luhansk, in the Donbas anyway.
Ну, если бы я куртку сразу не эту, а то делала. Да, если бы я бы не куртку поместила. А то же я сделала легкую. Если я почти тоже самое.
So, reportedly today, another 4 battalion tactical groups arrived in Ukraine. Can't confirm this, but on top of what they already had in the fight there and prepared, an additional 4 arrived today, at least 3 of which supposedly arrived in the Donbas itself. The other one is probably up by Kharkiv. And so that's within the last 24 hours, with more, like I said, still on the way. And so as we move a little bit further south here, we can see that there was a Russian helicopter operating in the Donbas. We suspect this is probably along the southern front, southeastern front, as it is currently supporting ground forces that are trying to push in this area. We do know that there's heavy shelling in support of fires in this area. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.
Войной настоящей. Иншаллах, вертушечка погнала. А ну дай ей пизды сейчас, да, сейчас она даст пизды. А, она все, она погнала туда наверх, видишь, смотри. Сейчас она туда сейчас. По корректировке летить. Диви. Класс. Красавчик. Красавчик вообще. Ой, красавчик. Да. Молодец. Красавчик. Я называю войной настоящей.
So, once again, we do know, just judging by the terrain, that this is probably southeastern part of Ukraine. This is a very open landscape. And we also suspect that there was also a Russian convoy that was bombarded today by Ukrainian forces. And they used basically a drone to walk the artillery onto target. And then they used long-range artillery to at least eliminate part of the convoy. We have a video of that today as well. And so as you can see here, lots and lots of Russian targets in the open. A lot of logistical vehicles, a lot of armored vehicles, APCs, BTRs essentially, some tanks. And so, very interesting. Hopefully we can get more footage. Once again, bear in mind, there's not a lot of footage coming out. Some of it's also coming out late. Like a 24 to 48 hour delay on a lot of stuff. So as we're going through and trying to find this, we're picking up as much as we can, but there's only a limited scope. So if we do make any mistakes here, we'll be correcting them in the future. And as we go farther south here, we can see that Nikolaevsk was basically it's proving a point that the destruction of the destruction of villages is not limited to areas of extreme fighting. Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel, Mariupol, Kherson, Mykolaiv, Kharkiv. These are areas that have all been in heavy fighting. When's the last time you heard of Nikolaevsky? Probably not until today. I know I certainly hadn't. So from what our understanding is, there was never any major amounts of fighting that ever took place in or around this area. Yet photos coming out today showed massive amounts of destruction all over the place. Burned out homes, destroyed homes. I mean, it's if there wasn't any severe fighting, why would it be like this? Why did it need to be this destroyed? Mariupol, they've been bombarding that for 2 months. It's basically been wiped off the face of the earth in terms of a city. And something that most people don't also remember is that, for the most part, to an extent, Mariupol is also seen as to some parts of the world, and even in Russia, was seen as a pro-Russian city, reportedly, from what I've heard. Not all of it, obviously, but to an extent, because it is in that eastern part. It's in the Donbas, a predominantly Russian-speaking part of the population here, which is why Russia is kind of using this as a way to kind of conduct this incursion, this invasion into Ukraine. So, not quite understanding why that the destruction in this area is as bad as it really is. It shouldn't be. However, that isn't all that surprising when we take a look at another video today, and that's because Russian media actually filmed. They were walking through occupied parts of Mariupol today, and we see them. It's not very long. It's not the focus of the video, but you can clearly see something that is very important. That right there is the important part. That is a truck of humanitarian and medical supplies of the International Committee of the Red Cross. They're also known as the International Committee of the Red Crescent for Middle Eastern countries. And when you're looking at something like this, this means that it's under part of the Geneva Convention. This is why you can't use the Red Cross cannot be used in video games, because it's actually a war crime. The Red Cross has to be used as part of the Geneva Convention to designate military personnel and humanitarian aid. You cannot fire on anything with the Red Cross. You cannot take weapons and equipment and anything with a Red Cross on it. That's why Russian medical vehicles that had weapons and ammunition in them, reportedly placed there by the Russians, was a big deal. It's against the Geneva Convention. It's a war crime. Likewise, you cannot fire on anything bearing a Red Cross. This is a completely burned out semi of humanitarian aid supplies that has the very markings of the International Committee of the Red Cross. And it is completely destroyed. So, and they focus on it for a little bit here. You see, it's not a small vehicle. And then they move on. So, the rest of it is they're just talking to people there on the streets. We didn't have it translated. The main focus that we wanted to bring to light there is the destruction of humanitarian aid, the destruction of things bearing the Red Cross, the International Committee of the Red Cross. There was a large Red Cross painted on top of a building. It was hit by Russian forces, supposedly. We weren't able to confirm when this happened. This we know is in Mariupol. We know where this is at. We know about when this has happened. And this only continues to prove a point that war crimes are continuing to occur. Because sure, there's been a lot of shelling. That looks like someone just hit it and it burned out with like an RPG. Because the rest of the buildings aren't crumbling around it quite like other parts of Mariupol that we've seen. There wasn't extreme amounts of exterior damage to those buildings. They weren't falling apart. It wasn't like a shell hit the side of the building. It looked like something had been targeted. So that is why we think it's important to be showing that kind of stuff. And we're going to skip over to the Azovstal directly for now, and we're going to go ahead and move here to where we see that Russian forces were prepping Bangalore torpedoes today in preparation for storming of the Azovstal steelworks plant. Now, there are a lot of people that are like, oh, look at the Russian military carrying this big board of wood with a bunch of explosives strapped to it. Look at this modern military. But that's to an untrained eye. I actually did correct that a little bit earlier because that's originally how it was getting presented. And as I was stating, this is something that's actually trained in even the U.S. military trains to do this. Every combat engineer, every assaultman, every engineer is trained. There are purpose-made Bangalore torpedoes, but for the most part, you take an E-stake or a metal stake for like fencing, and you can strap explosives to it. It makes a shape charge, and what this is used for is for clearing obstructions, things like razor wire or barbed wire, and general not heavy obstructions in your path. That's the purpose of it. And so as we can see here, they have been preparing to do that.
А что это у тебя за такая?
Это моя бейсбольная бита.
У нее какие-то странные намотаны кусочки.
Это для улучшения ее бейсбольных качеств.
А если серьезно, скажи, что это?
Это тротил с пластидом для проделывания проходов в бетонных заграждениях.
Как раз на штурмах, да?
And so, while it looks very cheap and very crude, it is, but it's very effective. And once again, this isn't... Now, most people say, well, I mean, it's not, look at the finest fighting force in the world. I'm not saying that the Russians aren't incompetent, because they have been proving rather incompetent, but there is still some skill required to do things like explosives and shape charges and knowing how to build that. So... And it's something that gets trained even in the U.S. military and Western military. So very important to know the distinction of something that is just, for instance, putting wood on the side of vehicles for extra armor plating. That's one thing, as opposed to something that is rather common knowledge from military tactics to cheaply but efficiently get done what you need to get done. That is a entirely different scenario. So remember that kind of going forward. Some things may seem crude, but in the field, things are crude. But that, as they are preparing to storm the Azovstal, that kind of brings us today. The Azovstal has been under intense bombardment. In fact, today there were attempts to create humanitarian corridors. That did not occur. Russian shells continued to fall during that time. The defenders and the civilians were once again given an ultimatum. And that ultimatum was to last up until 2 p.m. local time. That was turned down. However, what gives this video its name is because the commander of the Marines there in Mariupol stated today he gave what he thought is going to be the last address from the defenders of Mariupol. And he said in this address that this may be our last address, as we have over 500 wounded, and that we may be killed in the coming days, if not hours. So, coming from inside of the Azovstal, they are no longer measuring the amount of time they can hold off the Russian forces. They're in days or weeks or months. They are measuring it in hours. And they pleaded that the international community come, evacuate them, and take them to a third-party nation, meaning someone not involved in this war. So whether that's Turkey and the United States or Poland or wherever, not to be in Ukraine, not to be in Russia, take us completely somewhere else. So that is the word coming out of the Azovstal, and we do have the video of that speech. It is in Ukrainian. It's been heavily translated, of course, by multiple people, but let's take a look here.
Наше звернення до світу. Це може бути нашим останнім зверненням. В нас, можливо, залишились лічні дні або години. Угрупування противника десятки разів перебільшує нас. Вони мають панування у повітрі, в артилерії, в угрупуваннях, які діють на суходолі, технікою та танками. Ми ведемо оборону на одному об'єкті, на заводі, де знаходяться військові Маріупольського гарнізону та цивільні особи, які потрапили в пастку війни. Ми звертаємось до світових лідерів допомогти нам. Ми звертаємось з проханням застосувати в нас процедуру екстракшн та вивести нас на територію третьої держави. Маріупольський гарнізон військових, з нами більше ніж 500 поранених бійців та сотні цивільних осіб, серед яких є жінки та діти. Ми просимо надати нам безпеку на території третьої держави. Дякую.
And that is desperation. The look in his eyes alone, you can tell that this is it. We had talked about this prior, of course, when we said that Mariupol it's the beginning of the end for Mariupol. And we've said this before, they obviously are still holding, but it's coming. And where we have heard from the Ukrainian side over and over and over again, we're going to fight to the last man, we're not going to give up. They still haven't given up, they refuse to give up, they refused it today. But it's desperate, and this chapter of the war is going to be coming to a close here within the next coming hours and or days. The entire Azovstal, from our understanding, has been, much like the rest of the city, essentially wiped off the map. Large bombs are being dropped. Specific munitions, such as bunker busters, are being dropped onto these locations. There are civilians inside. We saw videos of civilians inside today on mainstream media that came out of the Azovstal. There were some videos, but since then, the Azovstal has gone quiet. We do not know what's going on. I don't think we'll have any news until it's probably over. But that is the situation in Mariupol. It is the closing hours of the fight for the city. So we'll be watching this closely. We do hope that there is some kind of a favorable outcome that can come of this. Zelensky has offered to trade prisoners for the safe evacuation of the civilians and the troops inside of Mariupol. But he has also stated that when the Russians take Mariupol, if they end up killing the civilians and the troops inside, that negotiations will never resume. So they will never be able to come to negotiations. And so that is the situation inside the city of Mariupol on this very dark and desperate hour. And as we move on over into Kherson, A pro-Russian blogger was killed in Kherson today. Valery Kulishov was killed under unclear circumstances, more than likely partisan activity. This comes as more of the individuals that are in quote-unquote collusion with Russian forces are coming under increasing scrutiny and under increasing attack from partisan groups in occupied territories. It is also, while unconfirmed, believed that Valery attempted to apply to become the occupational police chief after the Russian forces took the city. So we do have a photo of the car here. And we do not have any further information regarding that. Obviously, it's likely partisan activity, but once again, we can't confirm. And according to a U.S. analysis, Ukraine liberated the city of Oleksandrivka today. This isn't coming from Ukraine's side. In fact, what's been going on here, satellite imaging is showing a very heavy fighting in parts of the Kherson Oblast, but Ukraine hasn't said anything yet. In fact, there's been very limited information along this front for a long period of time now. We've seen some places that were in fact captured, but for the most part, it's been very limited. So, but this is coming from a U.S. independent source. This is coming from the Department of Defense and their analysis saying this has been taken. So, more than likely, it was already taken a little bit ago and now is getting determined to have been official. And now they're probably pushing further south towards Kherson as that counteroffensive continues. But we can't confirm any of that because we just don't have the information. And so inside of Ukraine, that is all the news for tonight. But we do have some interesting news and developments for Russia. And the first thing that we want to start with here is the fact that parts of Bryansk Oblast were flooded right along the Russian and Ukrainian border. This was said to be intentional, and that it was in order to limit the ability for armored vehicles to be moving in the area. We do not know if this was something that was done by the Ukrainians or if this was done by the Russians. But we do have photos coming out of Bryansk Oblast showing that flooding coming out. So obviously that'd be rather difficult and muddy, and it would bog down those heavy armored vehicles. It's already Razbutitsa season. But that is the information we have coming out of there. And as we push a little bit further north here, we can see that up in St. Petersburg, the mark of Free Russia is starting to pop up across the country. Now, obviously, the Russians aren't able to openly protest because they immediately get cracked down and thrown in prison and, judge, jury, and what we can only assume is executioner all at the same time. But it's 15 years in prison. And here we can see in St. Petersburg that L with the colors of the Free Russian Federation, which is the blue and the white. They no longer recognize the red because they wish to wipe away the blood of Russia. And this goes, and I have something to kind of follow up with this. And I was thinking earlier of where I would kind of interject this. I had a very interesting thing happen to me at work today. So, I do work a full-time job, which is why I'm not the one that personally finds a lot of this information. In fact, we have an entire staff team of researchers who help me and put this together and translate, and they dedicate a lot of their time to this, and I could not thank them more than enough. But while I was at work, what my job is I work for a trucking company, a transportation company. And I do what's called drive away, and I make sure that I dispatch and allow trucks to go from one place to another, new trucks, so that way they can be used for whatever they need to be used for. and that includes UPS vehicles and FedEx vehicles and stuff like that. Today, I had an interesting person come through that was coming to do a pickup in our yard, and his name is Alexei. Alexei is a very recent immigrant to the United States, and he is Russian. In fact, he comes from the areas around Moscow, where he lived for an extended amount of time. He said he had also lived in Siberia, but he had moved and studied in France, and he had not only studied in France, but that's where he learned English. But he was still very much a Russian. He was very proud to be Russian. And we were having some issues with the vehicle, and that kind of sparked a conversation. I didn't tell him about the stream at all, but he had noticed my jacket, because I wear a jacket to work that has some stuff from when I was in the Marine Corps. And we got to talking, and it eventually became this, the topic of the war. And what he said, he didn't say he supported Ukraine. He didn't say he supported Russia. None of that. What he stated was, I wish people could just talk to each other. And it was very, very simple. And that started in a very long discussion. And I think that epitomizes something and emphasizes something about what's going on in the world. Because I've said before here that there is no reason to hate the Russian people. The government, the armed forces, sure. Because the armed forces are committing war crimes. We've seen that. The government is doing awful things. We've seen that. We know that there are Ukrainians, small sect, large sect, we don't have a lot of information. We know there are probably bad eggs in the Ukrainian side too that are doing things that they shouldn't be. Because that is a fact of war. That happened during World War II. The Allies definitely weren't saints either. But it doesn't get reported on nearly as much. And he kind of talked to me about some of that stuff. I didn't verify whether or not how much of it was true or not. But he didn't seem to lean one way or the other. He was very much in the middle, and he said, I wish that people could just talk to each other. I don't understand why this stuff is going on. And so I think that kind of emphasizes once again the point of we can't really hate the Russian people. There's no point in hating the Russian people themselves, and you never should, because they're not necessarily the ones behind this. Even if they support it openly, they are not getting told anything else. And they don't really have, they can't really have their own opinions from independent sources like we are lucky enough to in the West, to at least to a majority degree, I could say. So take that for what you will, but I thought it was very interesting. I've had two instances at work like this. I had a Ukrainian come in as well, not long after when I started working with another YouTuber prior to this project. And it's been very interesting, and it was a very kind of a stark and startling thing to happen to me today that I thought was worth sharing. And so moving on from that, we're going to go down here into Moscow. And this is something that is kind of infuriating to a lot of people right now. And that is that this is coming from a Russian state news agency. It's coming from NTV, which is, once again, a Russian state news media site in Russia. And they announced today that the government is planning on having a May the 9th parade, which is their Victory in Europe parade. It's that huge military parade that they've had since the times of the Soviet Union following World War II. They bring out the ICBMs and all the tanks, and everyone gets dressed up in their best uniforms and marches down the Red Square. They're going to have a parade in Mariupol. There you go. The Immortal Regiment will be held on May the 9th in Mariupol. Now this confirms several things that we had heard coming out of Mariupol in the past couple of weeks. And that included that the mayor on the occupied side had been told to clear up for the May the 9th parade. This also gives credibility to some claims, including new laws in effect in the area that say that you cannot bury the dead, the 13 crematoriums that are supposedly operating in the city, the excavation of graves that are dug in places like the parks and the medians and in people's own backyards and gardens. So this, while we can't confirm those last three, there is now credibility to them, because one that we had heard that leading up to those three were a result of that, which is the fact that they were planning on holding a May the 9th parade, is now official. That has been confirmed. That trickles down to, so if that's confirmed, where does the last three stand? And then there's now some credibility to those claims. We're not going to say they're confirmed, but there is credibility to them. And as we move up here northward, we can see here that Russia tested a new intercontinental ballistic missile system. I apologize. It's called the Samat, and it flew over 6,000 kilometers here from Mirny, which they have a launch pad here in Mirny. In fact, if we zoom in here, I have it here on the launch pad. There you go. That is their testing facility right there in Mirny. But they also fired this thing all the way into Kamchatka, which is on the far eastern side of Russia. So over 6,000 kilometers distance traveled, and this is a show of force by Russian forces and by Putin to say, I do still have a nuclear arsenal. And this is coming as a lot of places like Germany is saying that by the end of the year, they're going to be cutting off oil supplies from Russia. This comes as many other countries are talking about cutting off both gas and oil. This is coming as more consideration is being given to giving Ukraine tanks, and modern first generation tanks, not the Soviet stuff, things like Leopard 1s, things like, those modern equipment, Western equipment that would make a very big difference in their war effort as long as they were trained on the systems, which is currently ongoing. In fact, the U.S. is apparently training in NATO territory Ukrainians on some of the weapon systems being given to them to effectively be able to use them and employ them in combat. And this is meant to send a signal. It was a possibility he would fire a nuclear weapon into the Baltic Sea earlier during the war when it first started as a show of force, but we can see this one coming out just as well. We do have some videos of the launch. So, very important show of force, because this is once again another nuclear kind of escalation on Russia's part. They've said that they're going to put their forces on high alert. We saw that, but the U.S. hasn't noticed any change in how they're operating or any movements of nuclear equipment. We do know that some were moved. We saw them being flatbedded on train cars. But this is a serious escalation that the West is now taking very seriously and has been heavily reported today. But it was a dummy warhead. There was not a live nuclear warhead inside of it. It was a dummy warhead and a test of the rocket of the ICBM itself, not the nuclear warhead. So they just had a dummy. They just had dummy explosives up there. Nothing real. Just enough to simulate the weight. And that covers Europe. And so we're going to go ahead and move down here. And there have been some developments here down in Israel, specifically in the Gaza Strip. And that is the so from the Gaza Strip, rockets were fired over Israeli territory. However, they were intercepted by the Iron Dome air defense system that Israel upkeeps. It's considered one of the, for Israel and to the world, this is considered the leading air defense system in the world. This is something that the U.S. has kind of wanted to give to Ukraine. This is something that was talked about, but just wasn't feasible. Israel is relatively small as a country, and so it's much more effective over a smaller surface area to cover. But we can see that effectiveness in this video today.
קבלו מה קורה פה, קבלו מה קורה פה, קבלו, אימא'לה. נדר, כמה אימא'לה. קבלו מה קורה פה, קבלו, אימא'לה. נדר, כמה.
So this obviously isn't the first time the Iron Dome system has been used. In fact, it's been used quite a lot. And it has proven relatively effective every time. The majority, I think it's like upwards of 80% of munitions are detected and are intercepted by the system. I think it's like 86% or something. It's ridiculously effective as an air defense system. But in retaliation, regardless, the IDF once again conducted airstrikes in Gaza in retaliation for those rockets being launched, and we do have some information on that as well. So I'm going to take a little bit of a step back because I just received an interesting question. Rather an interesting statement. And it was in regards to when I was saying about not talking to each other. And this is coming from Valkyries, who said, about the not talking part, no world leaders actually called Putin, have they? Maybe the president of France? That's correct. In fact, a lot of the countries in Europe and in the West are pushing for greater isolation of Russia. Which can be a double-edged sword. I think anything is a double-edged sword, but I can understand why. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. I'm not going to say it's the wrong thing to do, because I know things at a tactical level to an extent, not on a strategic or political or any of that, because I have no experience in it. But I can understand why the world would feel this way, and that's because think of people since the start of the war have almost completely forgotten the fact that there was a buildup for months and months and months and months prior to this war even happening. We knew about this starting at the end of last year. We knew about this at the beginning, at the end of last year. I'm talking like November and December of last year. And that's because there was a significant enough amount of Russian forces on the border. Something like there were already 90,000 troops on the border by the time that the U.S. even said anything. That, hey, this is a bad thing. And then diplomatic negotiations tried and went on and on and on and on and on for, 4 months before the invasion even started. And there was no real gains. There were no real diplomatic gains. It didn't even seem, for the most part, at least this is coming from someone who wasn't involved in any of these talks, that it doesn't seem, according to the information that we have available, that Russia was even serious about the talks. And that goes both ways. Yes, you can say that the United States and Germany and Denmark and the UK and Poland haven't reached out to Putin, but a phone works two ways. Putin also hasn't reached out to them. So, yes, the Austrian Prime Minister. So I got another comment question asking about the Austrian Prime Minister. And yes, the Austrian Prime Minister said and did end up going and talking to Putin. I'm not disregarding anyone who has tried to talk to him. But in his own words, coming from the Austrian Prime Minister, the talks were very heated, and it did not seem that they had a large impact in changing Putin's mind. So, and that's coming from the man who was in the room alone with Putin. So I can't, once again, the phone works two ways. Just like the Austrian Prime Minister went to Putin, Putin could also have called the President of the United States or Boris Johnson. Or if he wanted to skip Boris Johnson, go straight to the Queen, so be it. I think she would have no problem probably trying to de-escalate the situation. Or with Putin, or Chancellor Scholz in Germany, or anybody. President Zelensky. It's questionable if he would talk to him. I wouldn't blame him if he didn't. I wouldn't blame him if he did. I think that would be a very interesting conversation that I would love to be a fly on the wall for. But they haven't. They've sent envoys that and those talks have gotten little to no progress at all and are constantly on the brink of never happening again. Much like I said earlier with Mariupol. I'm sorry to digress for those that are here for the international news. I will get back to that. But I'm not a political affairs person. I don't talk about the political affairs of a lot of things, just the general stuff that I know based off of the information that we have and the stuff that I have experience with, like in the Middle East and Syria. But once again, things work both ways. Yes, the U.S., the President of the United States, or the Chancellor of Germany, or anybody could reach out to President Putin and try to get him to talk. But when they did that for 4 months before the invasion, it didn't stop the invasion. It still happened. And not only did it happen because the pretext prior to this was we are conducting military exercises on our borders in our land. They moved into Belarus. We're conducting military exercises jointly with Belarus now. They put troops in Transnistria, which we have yet to see deployed at any point so far. No, we have a presence in Transnistria, and we're going to conduct some smaller training operations there. Their Black Sea fleet went into the Black Sea and essentially cut off all international shipping to Ukraine. We're conducting exercises. It's too dangerous for merchant ships to be in the area. All the while, diplomatic negotiations, attempts to reach out by the Western powers. I don't agree or disagree on either side. I'm never going to give that opinion because this isn't a political affairs channel. But the attempts were made prior to this even happening, let alone now. And it is obviously the will of the rest of the world that the time for talking has finished because they tried that route and it failed. And now it is a time for action. And for Ukraine, at least in the eyes of Zelensky, the action is not enough. There needs to be more action. And something that was brought up is the fact that during the height of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the United States spent $100 billion a year on the war effort. $100 billion against insurgents. This is a full-scale war between two countries in the U.S. In total, there's only been like $1.5 billion of aid that's been sent to Ukraine by all foreign counterparts. That is part of his frustration. And the U.S. alone spent $100 billion a year fighting insurgents for 20 years. So that is part of his frustration. And I can understand that. I can understand why that would be frustrating. Knowing that. And so that is kind of the two sides of the coin. Once again, phones work both ways. Well, we could talk to Putin. We tried to do that. It failed. He invaded anyway. He lied and then he invaded anyway. The narratives are almost complete polar opposites on both sides. If you're talking to Russia versus talking to a Western country, it's been polarized and divided to the point that it's questionable if there will ever be any kind of normalized relations between the West and the East ever again because of this. And that is something that is going to have repercussions not just until the end of the war, but repercussions for decades, possibly longer. These could be repercussions that your grandchildren will be dealing with. History is not divided into segments. Everything affects everything else. And so going forward, that will be an important part to play, and we will have to see what happens. But returning back to the international news here, we just finished up our segment here. Once again, rockets were intercepted today over Israel, fired from the Gaza Strip. It was intercepted by the Iron Dome defense system, and in retaliation, the IDF conducted more airstrikes in the Gaza Strip, targeting some of those suspected rocket launch locations. And as we move up into Syria, there has been some more escalations of violence. The first thing is that a skirmish between rebels and Syrian government forces near the city of Atmana was left multiple dead and many captured, reportedly. There hasn't been very official numbers coming out of here. In fact, it's relatively scarce information to get accurate numbers. The SDF, for instance, take immense losses. We just never hear about it. There is immense fighting in Syria. We just don't hear about it. Because it's been going on for the last, 9 years now. And what's the point of reporting? No one cared the first 9 years, so why would they now? But we do know, once again, we would like more sources on this. If you have them, please let us know. But we do know that there was some fighting in the city of Atmana, and the rebels are currently demanding a prisoner exchange for whatever government forces they did capture. And so I believe we have a video here regarding that.
السلام على سيدنا محمد نبي الأمة والمرسلين. احنا في عدوار عتمان قطعنا الطريق واخذت أسره مقابل المعتقلين وما راح اسلمهم غير مقابل المعتقلين. تكبير.
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. دوار عتمان تحت سيطرة الثوار الأحرار.
So that was part of that declaration regarding the prisoner exchange. And as we move down towards Aleppo, the SDF suffered 3 casualties today. 3 of its members were killed after a vehicle was hit by a drone strike from an unknown origin. No faction has yet taken responsibility. So I believe we have a picture of the destroyed vehicle. A video, I apologize. And it's just debris from the vehicle. I get flashbacks to the images of al-Soleimani's car in Baghdad. But the basically no faction has taken responsibility. For those that don't quite understand the war in Syria, don't worry, you're not alone. I served there for 4.5 months, and I don't understand it either. Basically, though, I can break it down to an extent. So this patch of green here in this patch of river is called the Middle Euphrates River Valley, also known as the MERV, and it includes areas such as Deir ez-Zor, Kasham, and Al-Raqqa, which was a site of a major fight in both of these areas against the battlefield ISIS. And this moves all the way down to Al-Qaim, which is here at the border between Syria and Iraq. This right here, this area, Shaddadi, Deir ez-Zor, Raqqa, Al-Qaim, all the way up to Mosul was what was under the control of the Islamic State. This is ISIS territory. This is where the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant or is Iraq and Syria, it's where these existed. And within Syria itself, you have a civil war going on. This between Bashar al-Assad, who is the government leader. He's the president. He's Russian-backed. There are Russian forces in Syria. In fact, we've seen them conduct airstrikes here on the channel in Aleppo. But he has both the government forces, the Russian forces, and he also has pro-government militias. Then you have rebels who are fighting him directly. Then you have ISIS. And then that is all pretty much in the south. Anything south of this Euphrates River. North of the Euphrates, because this is the deconfliction line, you have American forces, which are in Deir ez-Zor province and Al-Shaddadi province and areas like this. Not to get any specifics, but we do know that there are American forces here, as well as other coalition forces. I believe the Poles are also located here, and the French. But you up here, once you get north, in 2019, 2020, Turkey invaded invaded Syria, and they actually had an incursion up here along this northern front, and they have pro-Turkish militias down here near Aleppo fighting. As well, backing this American side north of the Euphrates is the Syrian Democratic Forces, or the SDF, which is it's composed of multiple groups, both Arab and Kurdish, but the two major portions of the SDF are the YPJ and the YPG, which are the two sects of the Kurdish militias. Similar to the Peshmerga, which is in Iraq. And that's basically the basic bare minimum gist of what's going on in Syria. For anyone that's interested in the actual geopolitical part of it. But there's like 40 something factions fighting in this one country. It has been an absolutely bloody war, and there really isn't any end in sight. It's kind of been fought to a stalemate at this point. And everyone's trying to kill ISIS at the same time. But that's not the only place. As I just had done by mistake, regarding the incursion of the Turks here in Syria, they did in fact also conduct incursions into Iraq, but they did that yesterday. We actually found out within the last 72 hours that Turkish special forces, as well as air forces, have been conducting strikes and raids throughout Iraqi Kurdistan, which is up here near Dahak, and in the northern parts of Iraq itself. North of Erbil and Mosul, essentially. And today, there are multiple dead, including the field commander of the PKK, which is a Marxist Kurd group. His name is Radur Kobani. He was confirmed to be amongst the dead after there was a meeting of leading PKK members following these airstrikes and attacks by the Turks in Iraqi territory. And they conducted an airstrike on that compound. And so, this is Kobani himself. He was indeed killed in the attack. The PKK is essentially only considered a terrorist group by Turkey itself. There was a lot of fighting inside of Turkey between the Turkish PKK. Some of them fled across the country. However, since then, there's kind of been bad blood between Turkey and the Kurds, which is one of the suspected reasons that Turkey did the incursion here in the north. One, it's a NATO member, which is why the U.S. had to pull out, so that way NATO wasn't fighting NATO on accident. But also, it's, once again, the SDF is mostly comprised of Kurdish forces. So, there is a little bit of tension there. And as we move over into more of the sub-Saharan or the Asian continent here, we don't have a whole lot coming out. We don't have any more developments in Shanghai, but we do have some developments here in Karanagar, which is in India, and that is that the Islamic State did set fire to a local police station. There are currently no reports of incidents, but this comes as ISIS has been, or the Islamic State, I should say, has been conducting escalated amounts of violence globally. We've seen escalations in the Pacific. We've seen escalations in the Middle East. We've seen escalations in Africa. So far, Europe has been all kind of focused more on the war in Ukraine, and we haven't seen any widespread violence there yet. Nor have we seen it in North or South America thus far. But it could be a possibility, as there are probably hidden sects all over the world. But we do have a video here regarding this incident.
Got it?
I will say that guy has a really good arm. But yes, anyway, that was them throwing what I believe is probably a Molotov cocktail at that police station. And as we move further south here, we see that the Islamic State also conducted an attack here in Nigeria once again in the city of Taraba in Nigeria. It's a very small village if you actually take a look at it. Let's zoom way in here. Yeah, that's the village. But there was a cattle market inside of the village where a lot of Christian locals were meeting. They the Islamic State set off an IED. This killed at least 3 people and injured an additional 19. Of course, it was based off of religious reasoning. So they were killed because they were Christians, essentially, by the Islamic State, which is not unheard of. And we can see the results of some of these blasts here. This is not the first attack that the Islamic State has conducted in Nigeria. In fact, there has been ongoing fighting in many parts, including by government forces over in the area of Borno, which is here on the, if I can zoom out here, which is here along this kind of eastern border of Nigeria over here with Cameroon. And as we move over into Ethiopia, this is something that I was talking about at the intro. There is a donation link regarding this situation, and we're getting this from the national news. But 1,900 children under the age of 5 have died in Ethiopia due to malnutrition since the beginning of the year. And this is coming from local medical experts and also from the United Nations. And this is because Ethiopia has had itself some political turmoil. Rebels actually control most of the territory of Tigray, in fact, over 90% of it. The government troops have left the area. However, it's essentially those rebels have essentially isolated the area of Tigray, which is in northern Ethiopia. And part of the concern here is that 90% of the 5 million residents in this region require humanitarian assistance just to survive. And right now, it's believed of that 5 million residents, 115,000 children, which are under the age of 5, are currently suffering from extreme malnutrition, which means if they do not get further assistance from humanitarian efforts, that they will likely perish as well. So because of that, we added a section specifically for Ethiopia. We do already have something there. It's called Hope Ethiopia. We went ahead and got that vetted. They give 99.6% of their donations actually go to the humanitarian efforts here. So please go and check them out. Once again, if you are watching this and you have some information regarding South Africa or any other locations in the world, more stuff for Southeast Asia or Ethiopia or Somalia would be much appreciated. So please send us those links, join our Discord, shoot those links over to a staff member so we can vet those. It'd be greatly appreciated. But we did add one here for Ethiopia. We were able to find one that we could vet and that we could actually add to that list to make sure that that money gets where it needs to go. And so we move on to North America. And something a little bit funny happened today. The U.S. Capitol had a false alert, and this is because that there's currently a military kind of appreciation going on, Appreciation Week, and the U.S. Army conducted a jump just south here at the Nationals Park, and what ended up happening is no one apparently told the Capitol, like the actual government. It didn't get up far enough in the chain, and this actually put the Capitol building and the White House, which President Biden was meeting with high-level military officials at the time in the White House, on a short lockdown during this time. So, however, once again, it was short. It was quickly resolved that it was just an accident. They did not notify everyone they needed to notify regarding the fact that they were going to have low-flying military aircraft and parachutists coming in and dropping out of these. So the incident was resolved and the lockdowns were lifted shortly afterwards. And moving on finally to our last bit of news. This is, once again, we're going to end this on kind of an interesting or cool note, and that's because that there's new sunspots on the sun. In fact, these are so big that they could swallow the Earth whole. So apparently the magnetic fields of the sun actually goes through about 11-year cycles, or solar cycles. They have low and high phases of activity, and these cycles kind of reach a peak, and then they kind of lose their. I'm trying to find the words to describe this. They kind of lose their ability to react, and this can cause different things such as sunspots. And right now we're in what's called solar cycle 25, and it's expected to reach its maximum amount of activity by late 2024 or early 2025. So something very, very cool. We have a couple photos here to give you a look. These are absolutely massive. Once again, these sunspots could swallow the Earth whole. That is insane. Of course, the sun is absolutely insane in size as well, but it is pretty cool to think about. Here we can see more of, I believe that's actually an infrared picture of the sun showing some of these holes opening up on the sun. And we are getting this, of course, from Live Science. Live Science has been a wonderful source for us. Unfortunately, we don't have too many independent sources like we do for Ukraine regarding these, but we hope to make some in the future. Once again, if you have some, please let us know. We would love to go through and vet them. And with that, that actually closes today's news. So a lot of developments, a lot of stuff that we can't confirm, and some stuff that we may have to go back and reconcile, we may have to fix. Because, once again, many of the situations in the world are very fluid, they're very dynamic, they're chaotic, disturbing, and not everything is clear all of the time. And so we try to do our best to be as unbiased as possible. If we are biased on something, we declare it, much like we've declared a bias for Ukraine, just because of overwhelming evidence that we've seen here on the channel. And likewise, if we screw something up, we want to be able to openly admit that. So we do announcements on the Discord, and we will also make announcements here when we say, oops, we screwed up, guys, this is what actually happened, and we go back and we'll correct it. And so please bear with us. There is nobody in the world at this point that is going to be able to accurately tell you 100% everything that's going on. Just because there's something called the fog of war. Once again, it's chaotic, and there are limited sources for this information. So it is a dark hour from Mariupol specifically. The humanitarian crisis is once again in Ukraine is once again going to heat up. Obviously, there are humanitarian crises in Somalia, where 90% of the country is dry. They're going through the worst drought in 10 years, and Ethiopia is also included in that because they are also on the Horn of Africa, and that same weather that's affecting Somalia is affecting them. On top of the malnutrition issues with the food and water insecurities they already face. That also includes places such as Indonesia and the Philippines, which were hit by Super Typhoon Rai, that have left many dead and many wounded and missing, and many who have lost everything, all of their food, their water, their homes. And also in South Africa, near Durban, where those massive torrential floods came through and wiped out everything and have killed, I believe, 431 people is the last time we reported. And there are still some missing. So with that, please check out the links in the description. And if you can't give a lot, give a little. And if you can't give anything, then at least give the video a like and a subscription. It does not take more than a couple seconds. And that lets us reach more people so we can raise more money for these efforts. We are always going to be doing fundraisers on every single stream, and it will never be monetized for personal gain. Everything goes back to the people that need it the most. So if you want to join us and become part of a continual force for good and be news that gives back, then please join us on the Discord. The link's also in the description. Give us a like, give us a subscription, let your friends know about us. We try to be as best of a news source as we can. I want to thank the staff. They are the ones that truly make this possible. I only lend the voice. So please give them a big round of applause. Please give them big thanks and a warm welcome. And hopefully we will have some better news tomorrow, and hopefully some more information on the situations going on around the world. And with that, I leave you. I hope you have a great night. Hope your families remain safe. Hope you remain safe and your friends are safe. And we will talk to you hopefully tomorrow. Good night.
Slogan!